The alarm bells screamed through the communication center on Earth Station Alpha. Lieutenant Rebecca Hayes rubbed her tired eyes and looked at the incoming signal for the third time. 3 weeks of deep space monitoring, and this was the strangest thing she'd ever seen. "Commander, you need to see this," she called out to Jack Morrison, who was nursing his 5th cup of coffee that shift. Morrison walked over, his boots clicking against the metal floor. The transmission was unlike anything in their databases. Soft, musical tones mixed with what sounded like crying. The universal translator was working overtime, struggling to make sense of the alien language. "Play again," Morrison ordered, leaning against Hayes' workstation. The voice came through clearer this time. It was gentle, almost fragile, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. But underneath that beauty was pure terror. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Zilani Confederation. Our worlds burn. Our children flee in terror. The metal devourers consume everything in their path. We have lost 12 systems in 30 rotations. Our fleets are broken. Our hope dies with each passing moment." Morrison frowned. He'd been monitoring space communications for 15 years, ever since humanity had cracked faster than light travel. Most alien chatter was trade agreements and boring diplomatic stuff. This was different. This was a species screaming for help. The message continued, and the translator picked up more details. The Zilani were offering their complete technological database to anyone willing to help them fight something called the Harvesters. These machines weren't just conquering worlds. They were eating them, converting all matter into more copies of themselves. "Sir," Hayes said quietly, "according to this data, the Harvesters have been active for over 200 years. They've consumed thousands of worlds. Nobody has ever stopped them." Morrison studied the star charts the Zilani had included. Their territory was 3 weeks away at maximum jump speed. The tactical data painted a grim picture. The Harvesters used swarm tactics, overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers. They adapted to every weapon used against them. They were relentless, emotionless, and apparently unstoppable. "Have any other species responded to this distress call?" Morrison asked. Hayes checked the broader communication channels. "No, sir. The galactic networks are quiet. Too quiet. It's like everyone's pretending they didn't hear it." That's when it hit Morrison. Other alien species were ignoring this because they knew they couldn't win. The Harvesters had probably destroyed civilizations far more advanced than humanity. Earth had only been in space for 50 years. Most aliens probably considered humans primitive cave dwellers with rockets. But Morrison had read the history books. Humans didn't run from impossible odds. They ran toward them. "Get me Admiral Burke on the secure channel," Morrison ordered. Priority 1. 20 minutes later, Admiral Thomas Burke's weathered face appeared on the screen. Burke had fought in the Resource Wars, survived the Mars colony crisis, and commanded the first human deep space fleet. If anyone would understand the situation, it was him. "Admiral, we received a distress call from an alien species called the Zilani. They're facing extinction from a machine collective called the Harvesters." Burke listened to the complete transmission without interruption. His expression grew darker with each detail. When it finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "How long since this was broadcast?" Burke finally asked. 3 days, sir." No one else has responded. Burke nodded slowly. "Prep the entire Third Fleet. Full combat load. We leave in 6 hours." Morrison blinked in surprise. "Sir, the odds are astronomical. These Harvesters have never been defeated. They've consumed entire civilizations." "Lieutenant," Burke said with a thin smile, "my grandfather fought in World War II. My father survived the nuclear winter. My mother helped rebuild civilization after the plague years. Impossible odds are a family tradition." Hayes looked up from her station. "Admiral, intelligence estimates the Harvester fleet at over 10,000 ships. We got maybe 300 vessels ready for deep space combat." Burke's smile widened. "Even better, the enemy won't expect us to be that stupid." As Burke signed off to prepare the fleet, Morrison realized something that made his blood run cold. Other species were staying away because they were smart. They understood that fighting the harvesters was suicide. But humans weren't that smart. They were something else entirely. 6 hours later, 300 human ships jumped into hyperspace, heading toward a war they couldn't possibly win. But as Morrison watched the fleet disappear into the void, he felt something that surprised him. He felt sorry for the harvesters. They had no idea what was coming for them. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Zolani Prime, and Captain Mike Thompson immediately knew they were looking at something beyond their worst nightmares. The planet below looked like a shattered jewel, its crystal cities cracking under relentless bombardment from geometric ships that moved like living things. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Lisa Parker from the sensor station. "Those aren't ships. They're like metal insects." The harvester vessels swarmed around the planet in perfect formation, each one the size of a city block. They move with mechanical precision, firing beams that turned solid matter into gray dust. Wherever the dust settled, new machines began growing from the ground like deadly flowers. "Incoming transmission from the planet," announced Communications Officer David Miller. "It's the Zolani." The main screen flickered, and Thompson got his first look at an alien. His jaw nearly hit the floor. The being that appeared was breathtakingly beautiful, tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to be made of living crystal. Her movements were so smooth, they looked like dancing. "I am Admiral Sarah Chun of the Zolani Defense Fleet," she said, her voice like music even through the translator. You actually came, but the readings say you're from Terra, the forbidden Death World." Thompson scratched his head. "Death World? Lady, we just call it Earth. And yeah, we got your message. Looks like you need some help with pest control." The alien's expression changed to something that looked like pure horror. "Pest control? These are the harvesters. They have consumed 1,000 worlds. They adapt to every weapon, learn from every defeat." "Right," Thompson nodded. "So basically space locusts with fancy technology. We've dealt with worse." Sarah Chen's crystalline features went pale. "Worse? What could possibly be worse than machines that devour entire civilizations?" Lieutenant Parker pulled up Earth's historical database on her screen. "Well, there was that time the entire planet froze solid for 1,000,000 years. Most species died, but humans kept going. Oh, and the time a giant rock from space killed everything bigger than a bread box. That was rough, too. And don't forget the Black Death," added Miller cheerfully. "Killed 1/3 of Europe, but we bounced back stronger than ever." Chen's holographic form was actually shaking now. "Your species survived planetary extinction events? Multiple times?" Thompson was starting to realize why no other aliens had responded to the distress call. Most species probably lived on nice, safe worlds where the biggest danger was maybe a thunderstorm. Earth had spent billions of years trying to kill everything on it, and humans had not only survived but learned to fight back. "Look," Thompson said gently, "I can see this is upsetting you. Why don't you tell us about these harvesters? What makes them so dangerous?" Chin took a shaky breath. "They learn. Every tactic you use, every weapon you fire, they adapt. Within hours, they become immune to your attacks. They have perfect coordination, no fear, no mercy. They turn your own technology against you." "Sounds like they've never fought humans then." Thompson grinned. "What do you mean?" Parker looked up from her console. "Ma'am, humans don't fight fair. We're probably the only species in the galaxy that considers cheating a legitimate military strategy." "Cheating?" Chin looked confused. "Psychological warfare," Miller explained. "Deception. Using the enemy's expectations against them. Fighting dirty when we need to." Thompson studied the tactical display, showing harvester movements. They moved in perfect patterns, each ship knowing exactly where every other ship would be. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "They fight like computer," he realized. "All logic and calculations." "Yes," Chin confirmed. "Perfect efficiency. That's why they're unstoppable." "Perfect efficiency is their weakness," Thompson said, and Chin looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "How is perfection a weakness?" Thompson called up the human fleet on his comm system. "All ships, this is Thompson. New mission parameters. We're not fighting a traditional enemy. We're fighting a very sophisticated computer program that thinks it's invincible. Admiral Burke's voice crackled through the speakers. Understood, Captain. What's the play? We're going to confuse them to death, Thompson replied. They expect logical tactics. So we're going to be illogical. They expect us to follow military doctrine. So we throw out the rule book. Chun was staring at the humans like they were insane. You cannot defeat perfect coordination with chaos. Watch us, Thompson said, then switched to the fleet channel. All ships, prepare for Operation Control Madness. Rules of engagement are simple. There are no rules. As the human ships began moving toward the harvester swarm, Chin realized something that made her blood run cold. The Zolani had asked for help from civilized beings. Instead, they'd summoned predators from a world that had spent eons teaching its children that survival meant becoming more dangerous than everything trying to kill them. The humans weren't here to save the galaxy. They were here to hunt. Colonel James Rodriguez gripped his rifle as a transport ship shook under enemy fire. Around him, 200 Marines checked their gear one last time. They were about to attempt something that had never been tried before, boarding a harvester ship while it was still operational. 30 seconds to insertion, called the pilot over the intercom. The thing is still trying to adapt to our weapons, so it's distracted. Rodriguez looked at his team. These weren't the perfect soldiers you saw in movies. They were mechanics, farmers, college students who had signed up to see the galaxy. But they all had one thing in common. They came from a planet that had been trying to kill them since birth. Remember the plan, Rodriguez told them. We're not trying to destroy this ship. We're trying to confuse it. The transport bay doors opened, and Marines jetted into space toward the massive harvester vessel. The machine was the size of a football stadium, covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Weapon ports tracked their movement, but the guns weren't firing. It's analyzing us, reported Sergeant Bill Murphy over the comm, trying to figure out what we are. Good, Rodriguez replied. Let's give it something to think about. The Marines landed on the hull and immediately began doing things that made no military sense. Instead of heading for vital systems, they started rearranging the ship's external components. They took weapons from destroyed areas and moved them to completely random locations. Inside the command ship, Dr. Rachel Green watched the operation through remote cameras. She had 3 degrees in psychology and had spent years studying how minds broke under pressure. Now she was applying those lessons to a machine intelligence. The Harvester is trying to understand why we're redecorating its hull, she reported to Admiral Burke. Its processing power is completely focused on solving what it thinks is a complex tactical puzzle. Burke nodded. What about the main fleet? Lieutenant Colonel David Miller's squadron was executing maneuvers that violated every rule of space combat. Instead of maintaining formation, his pilots were flying in seemingly random patterns. They fired at empty space, ignored obvious targets, and occasionally flew directly at harvester ships before veering off at the last second. Sir, their targeting systems can't lock onto us, Miller reported. They keep predicting where we're going to be, but we're not following any flight pattern they recognize. The harvesters have been designed to fight logical enemies. They analyze attack patterns, learn from previous encounters, and adapted accordingly. But humans weren't being logical. They were being deliberately, creatively stupid. Captain Lisa Parker led a boarding team onto a harvester manufacturing ship. Instead of sabotaging the production line, her team began feeding it random instructions. They programmed it to build flower pots instead of weapons, to paint decorative stripes on combat drones, and to manufacture thousands of tiny umbrellas. The manufacturing AI is having a breakdown. Parker laughed over the comm. It's trying to fulfill our orders while maintaining combat efficiency. The poor thing is making weapons that look like birthday cakes. Back on the command ship, Dr. Green was monitoring harvester communications across the entire fleet. What she saw made her grin like a predator. Admiral, they're talking to each other, and they're arguing. Machines argue? Burke asked. These ones do. They're trying to share information about human tactics, but every report contradicts the others. One ship says humans are cowards who run from battle. Another says we're suicidal berserkers who ram ships with our faces. A third says we're tactical geniuses using advanced psychological warfare. All of which are true, depending on the day, Burke observed. The confusion was spreading to the Harvester network like a virus. Ships that had operated in perfect coordination for centuries were now second-guessing every decision. Some became overly aggressive, charging into obvious traps. Others became paralyzed by caution, afraid to move without understanding human intentions. Rodriguez's Marines had found their way inside the boarded Harvester ship, but instead of fighting their way to the bridge, they were playing hide and seek in the corridors. The ship's internal sensors were going crazy, trying to track intruders who seemed to have no objective except causing mischief. "Contact!" shouted Corporal Jenny Walsh as a Harvester drone rounded the corner. But instead of shooting it, she threw her helmet at it and ran in the opposite direction while making weird noises. The drone stood there for several seconds, processing this encounter. Its tactical database had no reference for enemies who threw their own protective gear as weapons while making sounds that served no apparent purpose. Meanwhile, Miller's squadron was playing the galaxy's deadliest game of tag with Harvester fighters. Every time the machines tried to engage, the humans would suddenly start behaving like they were having a party instead of battle. "This is insane," whispered Admiral Chun, watching from her flagship. "They're treating this like a game." "That's the point," Dr. Green replied. "Games don't have rules the Harvesters understand. They're machines built for war, not play." The Harvester fleet, faced with an enemy that refused to act like an enemy, began making mistakes for the first time in their existence. The Harvesters learned fast. Within 6 hours of the initial human assault, they had adapted to every trick Rodriguez's Marines had tried. The machines stopped being confused by random decorations and started ignoring the fake orders Parker's team fed into their systems. Their tactical computers had analyzed human behavior and created new response protocols. But the humans were ready for this. Captain Mike Thompson watched from his bridge as Harvester ships reformed into new attack patterns designed specifically to counter human unpredictability. The machines had decided to treat humans like a particularly clever virus, something to be contained and eliminated through overwhelming force. "They think they figured us out," Thompson said with a grin that would have scared a shark. "Time to show them what humans do when we're actually trying." The real battle began when Lieutenant Colonel David Miller's crippled fighter took a direct hit from a Harvester beam weapon. The ship's engines died, life support failed, and the hull started venting atmosphere into space. Any rational pilot would have ejected. Miller aimed his dead ship at the nearest Harvester command vessel and pushed the throttle forward anyway. "Miller, what are you doing?" Burke's voice crackled through the failing comm system. "Physics lesson, sir," Miller replied calmly as his fighter accelerated toward the enemy ship. Newton's first law: objects in motion stay in motion. The Harvester vessel tried to move, but Miller's fighter struck it at a significant fraction of light speed. The explosion took out 3 other Harvester ships and left a hole in their formation that human forces immediately exploited. Admiral Sarah Chin watched in horror from her flagship. He killed himself just to damage one ship. "No," Dr. Rachel Green corrected quietly. "He killed himself to save everyone else. There's a difference." This was the moment the Harvesters truly encountered humanity, not the playful tricksters from the first assault, but the species that had crawled out of a world that killed 99% of everything that had ever lived on it. Sergeant Bill Murphy's squad had been cut off inside a Harvester manufacturing ship for 12 hours. They were out of ammunition, low on oxygen, and surrounded by hostile machines. The logical response would have been surrender. Instead, Murphy's team started taking apart the manufacturing equipment and building improvised weapons from Harvester components. They turned construction robots into makeshift tanks, rewired security systems to work for them instead of against them, and began hunting the machines that were hunting them. "Sir," Murphy reported over a jury-rigged communication system, "we've taken control of manufacturing Bay 7. The machines here are now building weapons for us instead of them." "How many casualties?" Rodriguez asked. "Johnson's got a broken leg. Martinez lost 2 fingers, and I think I cracked some ribs, but we're all still fighting." Chin listened to this exchange with growing disbelief. Your soldiers are fighting effectively while seriously injured? That should be impossible. Captain Lisa Parker, who was coordinating the technical assault teams, looked up from her console. "Ma'am, humans have been dealing with pain since we learned to walk upright. We don't stop fighting because something hurts. We get angry." The harvesters were learning this lesson the hard way. Their tactical computers had calculated that human forces should collapse after taking 30% casualties. Instead, the humans seemed to get more dangerous as their numbers decreased. Colonel Rodriguez was leading the assault on the main Harvester command ship, with only 40 Marines left from his original 200. But these 40 were moving through the ship like a pack of wolves, turning every corridor into a death trap for machines that tried to stop them. The closer we get to their central processor, the more desperate they're getting, Rodriguez reported. "These machines are actually afraid of us now." Dr. Green was monitoring Harvester communications from the human command ship, and what she heard confirmed Rodriguez's assessment. The machines were no longer sharing tactical data with their usual efficiency. Instead, their messages were filled with warnings about human unpredictability and requests for additional support. "Admiral," she told Burke, "they're calling for reinforcements. These machines that have never retreated from anything are asking for help." The tide turned completely when Captain Parker's engineering team managed to capture a Harvester repair facility intact. While other species had tried to destroy Harvester infrastructure, the humans decided to steal it. "We're not just taking their factory," Parker explained as her team worked to reprogram the alien systems. "We're turning it into a factory that makes things that fight Harvesters." Within hours, human control machines were rolling off Harvester production lines. But these weren't copies of human technology. They were Harvester machines programmed to think like humans. They moved unpredictably, ignored logical targeting priorities, and occasionally stopped fighting just to confuse their former allies. The Harvester fleet, faced with enemies that refused to die when they should and machines that acted like humans instead of proper computers, began doing something they had never done in 2 centuries of conquest. They started making mistakes. Real mistakes. Fatal mistakes. And the humans, who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning from their own mistakes, were ready to capitalize on every single one. 6 months after the last Harvester ship went silent, Ambassador William Carter sat in what used to be the Galactic Council's emergency bunker. The marble halls had been hastily converted into proper meeting chambers, complete with conference tables and translation equipment. Representatives from 47 different species sat around the massive circular table, all of them trying very hard not to look directly at the humans. Carter adjusted a simple black suit and smiled pleasantly. He looked like a middle-aged banker from Ohio, which he had been before joining the diplomatic corps. Nothing about him suggested he represented a species that had just solved the galaxy's biggest nightmare in under a week. "So," Carter said cheerfully, "I understand there's some paperwork involved in joining your little club here." The Zolani representative, Admiral Sarah Chun, shifted uncomfortably in her crystalline chair. She looked much better now that her worlds weren't being consumed by metal locusts, but there was something new in her eyes when she looked at humans. Fear, mixed with gratitude and a healthy dose of terror. "The application process is usually quite lengthy," she said carefully. "There are cultural compatibility tests, psychological evaluations, technological assessments." "We can skip most of that," interrupted the Vorthag delegate, a slug-like creature whose translator made him sound perpetually nervous. "After what we witnessed, I think we all agree that humans are compatible with our needs." Dr. Helen Wright, Earth's chief xenobiologist, pulled out a simple tablet and started reading. "We prepared a preliminary report on galactic threats that might need attention. So far, we've identified 14 potential extinction-level scenarios, 32 aggressive species that might become problems, and 17 different types of space parasites that could wipe out entire sectors." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the air recycling systems humming in the walls. 17 types of space parasites," whispered the Centaurian ambassador, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "Oh, those aren't too bad," Wright replied. "Most of them just eat planets. The real problem is this thing called the Gray Creep in the Andromeda Spiral. It turns entire solar systems into some kind of living computer network. Very nasty stuff." Carter noticed that several delegates had gone pale, or whatever the equivalent was for their species. "Don't worry," he said reassuringly. "We're already working on solutions. Shouldn't take more than a few months to handle." Admiral Burke appeared on the main screen via hologram, looking relaxed despite commanding the most feared military force in known space. Behind him, you could see human technicians working on what looked like capture harvester technology. "Status report, Admiral," Carter requested. "All quiet on the front lines," Burke replied. "The Harvester Collective sent us a surrender message yesterday. Apparently, the surviving units have decided to become farmers instead of conquerors. They're growing flowers now." "Flowers?" Chen asked weakly. "Seemed like a good compromise," Burke shrugged. "They keep their technology, but they use it to make pretty gardens instead of consuming civilizations. Win-win situation." The Zolani Admiral looked like she was having trouble processing this information. "You negotiated with them?" "Sure. Once they realized fighting humans was more trouble than it was worth, they became very reasonable. Amazing what good communication can accomplish." Dr. Wright looked up from her tablet. "Speaking of communication, we've been getting some interesting signals from the void sectors. Looks like there might be something big stirring out there. Really big, like eats entire galaxies for breakfast big." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The void sectors were the dark regions between galactic arms, where even the bravest exploration ships refused to go. "You're talking about investigating the void sectors?" the Altarian representative asked, his voice cracking with terror. "Already sent a scout fleet," Burke reported casually. "Should have preliminary data within the month. If it's hostile, we'll handle it." Carter noticed that 3 delegates had actually fainted. "Look, I know this is all a bit overwhelming, but the galaxy's been running scared from these problems for centuries. It's time someone dealt with them properly." "But how?" Chen asked. "How do you just decide to fight things that have terrified civilizations for millennia?" Carter considered this seriously. "Well, Admiral, it's like this. Humans come from a world where everything was trying to kill us from day one. Ice ages, volcanoes, plagues, predators, climate change, asteroid impacts. You name it, Earth threw it at us." He gestured to Wright and Burke. "We learned that running away just makes problems bigger. Better to face them head on while they're still manageable." "But what if you lose?" whispered the Vorthak delegate. Burke's hologram grinned. "Then we'll lose fighting. But we probably won't lose. Humans are very hard to kill, and we're very good at killing things that need killing." Carter pulled out a simple pen and signed the Galactic membership application. "So, when do we start solving your next crisis? My people get restless when they're not busy saving the galaxy." The assembled delegates realized they hadn't just gained a new member. They'd unleashed something far more dangerous than the Harvesters. They'd given humanity a to-do list.